So, welcome back to the Free in Life podcast. And we're happy for those of you who are returning to be with us again. And today we're going to discuss a very interesting topic. We're going to discuss the pros and cons of the different ways of leaving the organization, because how we leave the organization makes a big impact on how smooth things go afterwards. So, there's a lot of things to think about for those of you that are starting to wake up or that are PIMO. So we hope that this episode can help people in that situation really weigh out the pros and cons of the best way that you want to walk away from this organization. So there's basically four steps. There's or I'm sorry, not four steps, but four different options. One, which is the least resistance, is PIMO, and that's the safest thing to do. So if you're a little nervous about how people are going to react, then being PIMO is your safest option. And then the next option, if you really can't stomach staying in the organization once you find out the truth about the organization, then the next step would just be fading away, which can also be safe because you can also keep your friends and family if you fade away a certain type of way. And then the third step would be when you don't hide your beliefs on your question organization, it eventually catches up to you, and then the elders want to have a judicial meeting with you. And then the fourth way, which is the most proactive, is when we take our power back completely and write a disassociation letter. But all these have pros and cons, so that's what we're going to discuss in this episode. So, Samantha, would you like to start us off with what are some of the pros that you see, the advantages of those that do stay PIMO?
So I think that even though most of our audience are going to know what PIMO means, it's kind of XJW vocabulary, and it means physically in, mentally out. So that would be an individual who no longer believes in the organization, maybe doesn't even believe in anything that the organization teaches and stands for, but they can't leave. And the organization is very cleverly set up so that it is very difficult to leave. If you have friends and family that are witnesses, then sometimes the only option may seem that you have to just stay and just not voice your feelings and thoughts on this matter. The pros are, of course, that you get to keep your friends and family, and they may never be any wiser because it's quite easy to kind of fake being a witness. You just have to make sure you don't say anything out of line with Watchtower teachings. Keep going to meetings, do a bit of nominal ministry, occasionally maybe answer up. You can repeat something from the Watchtower. It's quite easy to keep it up as long as you also keep up kind of the lifestyle. Um, yeah, so those would be the pros. The pros are that you don't lose your connections, your community, and your family that are witnesses.
Yeah, and to add to that, that it's nice too because you can take your time when you stay PIMO. Like basically, there's no pressure. As you said, you're not going to lose anything. And there are some advantages of being a witness. It's not all bad. Like anybody, even if they're dishonest, like they always have to have something good to keep you in. So there are some good things about being witnesses. And when you stay PIMO, you can still have that. Like you can still have that community. Like for example, if say if your car breaks down or something, or you're in some sort of financial need, like they will come to your aid. You will get help. So you do have that community. Um, Maybe not always, but like or at least in my situation, that there are witnesses in the congregation that will always help you. And then like you can still take advantage of, say, for example, there's always going to be some couple that has an apartment. So sometimes you can just get an apartment with, regardless of your credit, like just because, oh, witness owns property. Sometimes employment works that way. So you are still connected with that network because they are good at networking. I'll give credit where credit is due. They're good at networking. Um, so for those that stay PIMO can still take the good stuff out of the organization that they want to kind of use, but know that they're not really slaving for the organization. But I don't have that much to say about the pros as far as being PIMO, because just my personal opinion, I think that the cons outweigh the pros when it comes to PIMO. Let me just give you just a short little story to just kind of explain where I'm coming from. So, my father was very toxic and abusive, and one time my mother had said to me that she's going to start saving money behind his back, like slowly, and when she saves up enough money, we were going to leave him. So, and she was dead serious about it. So she knew she was being abused. She knew her children were being abused. At this point, my brother had already ran away from home. But basically, her plan was like a 3 to 5 year plan because for her to save money behind his back without him noticing it, that's not that much money you can save. But in her head, it was she was waiting for the perfect situation, which would have took 3 to 5 years or more. And what eventually happened was because she stayed in a toxic relationship, her emotional and mental continued to decline. So it got to the point where she no longer had the will to even leave him. Until this day, she's still with him. And now she's the type that would just blame herself. Oh, it was my fault. He hit me because of my fault. And she never got out of that. And I think that the organization is basically like an abusive parent. I mean, they control you like a parent. They're like an abusive parent. So basically, some PIMOs, I think, I mean, there's some PIMOs that have been PIMO probably for 30, 40 years with no plan on leaving. And I think that sometimes a PIMO could have the plan, 3 to 5 year plan. Okay, I'm going to wait for everything to be perfect, and then leave. But then I think that they could get stuck in it forever because the longer you stay PIMO, and this is the point that I'm making, you're never going to get better. All of us who are witnesses, you can't leave this organization unscathed. You're going to have emotional problems. You're going to have some sort of mental problems. You can't leave unscathed. And when you stay PIMO, you're basically you're staying like in an abusive relationship. So I think that that's the important thing why uh, anyone that chooses to stay PIMO, and I mean, again, this is just my opinion, that it's really not a good idea long term because you're never going to be able to start making progress because you're still like in an abusive relationship. And that's what happened to my mom, that she had that plan to leave, but it never actually happened because the perfect circumstances never happened. And another thing about the perfect circumstances is that when you're in an abusive relationship, um, an abuser keeps you in a weak state. So those perfect circumstances really may never come up because they keep you in that weak state. And that's how the organization is set up. It's set up to cause an explosion if you try to leave. And it's very hard to find a way around that. So sometimes, like I think like in my mom's situation, it would have been better if she just went to a women's shelter and she still would have had her job and got help. Like that one might have not have been ideal, but if she just went for it, her life would have been a lot better off, and my life would have been better off too because I would have not gone through a lot of abuse that I went through. So that's just something too that PIMOs might want to keep in mind is that that perfect circumstance may not come up, and the longer you stay in the organization, the more this organization is going to really like kind of mess you up emotionally and mentally. So it may be tough, but if we just go for it, it may turn out better than staying in that toxic environment. But that's just my thoughts. I don't. What are your thoughts, Samantha, about the cons of staying PIMO?
I think it's the toll it is going to take on your mental and physical health. Um, there's there's definitely evidence that your health is going to suffer because if you're in a environment that you don't agree with or believe in, there's that you're kind of like constantly energetically a mismatch with your environment. You're constantly at odds. It's almost like living as like an undercover spy. Now, those types of professions take their toll on people's mental health and psyche and physical health. They would be like classed really high stress, extreme professions. And I think if you're PIMO, you're kind of living like that. I do think it would create quite a toxic state. There might be very good reasons to do it. If you're married, you have young children, your spouse is a very devout witness, it might be that you don't have much of a choice, at least for some time, to do anything about it. Or maybe you have elderly parents or relatives that need care, or a sibling that needs care. And there are circumstances like that it is very, very difficult to leave, or even voice how you might feel and think. There might be ways to resource yourself. It wouldn't be a bad idea if you're in that situation and you have access to counseling, which is completely confidential. So that might be an outlet where you could at least once a week for an hour speak to somebody who's not in any way linked to your life and just let it out. So there might be things like that you can do to just maintain, to try to look after yourself in those circumstances. But it's definitely not ideal, not as a long-term solution.
Yeah, exactly. And just before we go further, I just want to say to the audience that we're certainly not judging anyone, but we're really just putting out information for those in that situation to really consider. Because it is important to consider there's pros and cons of each of these decisions. But again, every situation is different. Obviously, the person that has young children with an XJW partner that is completely brainwashed, it's obviously going to be a lot harder to just walk away than someone that's single. But just to keep those things in mind, because I think the main thing is like how Samantha put it, it's definitely not good long term. Uh, but yeah, just keep those things in mind. So the next option that you have is fading away. And some of the pros of fading away is that you it's kind of like a PIMO where you don't got to face anybody. You don't necessarily have to face the elders. If you do it correctly, you don't even have to lose any family members. But a step above PIMO because you're no longer putting yourself in that abusive situation. You're no longer going to the hall. You're no longer hearing all the talks and being brainwashed and having to pretend. You can kind of just live your own life. And I think that fading is probably one of the most popular things that I think people do because there's a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses, and I'm saying Jehovah's Witnesses in the sense of they never actually faced a judicial committee. They've never got disfellowshipped. They're just gone. And I think technically some congregations may say, oh, they're inactive, but really they're basically, by their terms, they would be apostates if they known how they were thinking, but they're basically just technically inactive because they just faded away. So fading is definitely a very good option, especially if you're worried about losing friends and family, because when you fade, you can choose who you speak to about your beliefs. So if you have parents that you don't want to lose, they don't have to know why you're fading. You can kind of just play along like, oh yeah, just gotta I'm just busy, haven't made the meetings. And in some cases, people that fade it, they've found that moving states makes it a lot easier because if you move to another state where nobody knows you, then you don't ever have to act. You can go all out and celebrate holidays if you want, if you're living somewhere where you're not going to run into people. So those are kind of some of the advantages of basically just fading. What do you think of Samantha about the advantages of fading?
Well, I think it's a less traumatic way to leave. And like you said, initially you will have still that contact with friends and family in the organization. Really and truly, in the majority of cases, over time, they will start to soft shun you. So they will initially try to encourage you to come back to meetings, to come back to maybe assemblies, conventions, especially the memorial. So there will be that pressure that they're trying to kind of encourage you to come back. And if over time you sort of make it clear that you're not intending to, then the attitudes get colder. They start to consider you a spiritual danger to themselves, and they do start to avoid you. Not in all cases, but in most cases, it kind of ends up in a very similar outcome to if you're disfellowshipped or disassociated, with that thing that they can still speak to you. So they often do, even if it becomes known years later that your lifestyle is no longer in accordance with the sort of JW lifestyle requirements. quite a few people would probably still talk to you on the street, for example, or if they met you in the supermarket. So yeah, fading is definitely an option if there's family to consider. Again, it's something that might be worth doing. But I think if you do decide to fade, again, there might be a way you can do it that is a bit less obvious. Sometimes people will change a congregation, go a couple times, then disappear. Sometimes they will move to another area and just not move to the new congregation or even go abroad. And then, you do have to kind of prepare yourself for those conversations with concerned family members, especially once they realize that you're no longer a regular active witness, unless you tell them. But of course, if you tell them outright, there will be some questions. And again, what I would say is there's an element of expectation that you still think like a witness and behave like a witness and believe the same things if you fade. So in some ways, you remain partially in. Because if you start to say things that are outright against or disagree, you could still hit some rocky patches. I know of cases where someone has faded and the elders have actually gone out of their way to try to find out if their lifestyle is now immoral so they can disfellowship them, sometimes even in their absence. So it's not always an easy route. It a little bit depends on who you are, which congregation, which area, your background, and the elders.
Yeah, and like you said to that last point about the elders sometimes go out of their way to try to find out if they can disfellowship you. That's also a reason too why it's good to maybe do switch congregations, because your own congregation, they're going to know something is more wrong if you just stop showing up. But when you go to a new congregation, then it's like they don't really know your history that much. So if you start off weak, then they may just consider you inactive. So it's probably the safer route to definitely switch congregations, if anything. But uh some of the cons of fading that come to mind for me is that, so when you fade, you're still basically a Jehovah's Witness. And it's legal too, if I'm not mistaken. You can maybe touch on that because you know more about that than I do, but you're still listed as a Jehovah's Witness. And the elders, they can still share your business. They still got that publisher card where you're passed on it from other congregations. And so you're still in that system. You're still a Jehovah's Witness. And then they more likely too to still bother you. So then you will sometimes get those visits from the elders when they want to check on you, where you're at. Even if you switch congregations, you're still on their list. So some elder's going to be assigned. You're still part of that service group. But I don't think there's many uh cons to fading that are different from, like, in general, like any of the other methods we're going to talk about. But I think the big one is just understanding that you are still a Jehovah's Witness if you fade. And you may say, "Oh, I'm not a witness. I left the organization," but technically, there's paperwork. You're part of that congregation. They got your name. They got your information. They can spread your information if they want. You switch congregations, they're still going to send your publisher card. So that's just the con, is you are still a Jehovah's Witness. And in a sense, there's a psychological con to it as well, because you're still under watchtower control, because if you fade it, you're still in that mode of, I hope they don't find out. Like, I have to be careful what I say. Oh, if I have a social media, I can't post a birthday party because what if somebody sees it? So you're still basically being controlled by watchtower, not as much as being a PIMO, like it's a lot more freedom than a PIMO, but you're still under the control of watchtower, and you still got to basically make certain moves based on the elders finding out. And I think those are the cons of just simply fading. But before you mention what you're going to say about the cons of fading, could you explain the legal part, like as far as like the fact that we are, like, in a sense, registered with the congregation or something?
Yes, so if you delve into the history of the organization, there were reasons why all of those questions that you go through before baptism were brought in. And I do believe that it was a country where they were having some trouble being officially recognized and registered. the organization, and the way around it was to have essentially a legal contract between the organization and the members. So when you go through all those questions at your baptism in preparation, and even on the day, you affirm it, don't you, that you're part of the organization. That is actually a legal agreement. Now, even though you may say, I don't believe and subscribe to it, and you may denounce it verbally and say they don't have a hold on me, actually they do legally. You're still a member. And also there's a spiritual element to this, as well as the psychological element that Quinn mentioned. So the psychological element is that you still have to some degree, obey the rules, to not step out of line and cause too many issues and raise eyebrows and negative attention. So you still are kind of restricted by that set of rules that you signed up to when you became a member. It's like a members association. And the other thing is there is a spiritual tie. So spiritually, you're still part of the organization as well. And, I have a separate channel where I go into some of that stuff in more detail if you're interested in that side of it. But just to be aware that even if you verbally renounce it, you are still legally part of the organization if you simply fade and stop going.
And along with that point too, for those that have seen the last podcast, we talked about how me and Samantha both had the same situation where when we wrote our disassociation letters, they still try to like control, like, well, we need, in Samantha's case, they needed it in print, not an email. And in my case, they needed to verify over the phone that I sent the letter. And that goes along with Samantha saying, because that shows there is some legal aspect to it. There's a reason that they're so still concerned with, well, it has to be this way or it has to be that way, because it is like something legal. Um, and another thing too, why it's a good idea to, or one of the cons I can say is staying of fading, is that let's say you're in a situation where God forbid, but say that you end up passing away. Um, Depending on your family situation, if your family are witnesses and they still think you're a witness, guess what? You're having a witness funeral at the Kingdom Hall, and they're going to talk about you for 3 minutes. And all your new friends that are not witnesses that attend your funeral, they're going to hear a preaching talk. So, um, you're going to basically, and then you're, I forget what they call it, but when they make like a pamphlet that will talk about your life, like your JW family, it's all going to be, when you got baptized and all this stuff. So, and again, God forbid that anything happens, but it's just something to keep in mind that, um, if your family thinks that you're in and something does happen, and the same thing with the blood transfusion, that can get confusing too. But those are just things to keep in mind that if you run into those problems, you don't necessarily want to be in a situation where if you can't speak, witnesses who think you're in are still going to be like, nope, he can't take blood. And if God forbid you do end up passing away, you're having a JW funeral. So just something to keep in mind as far as the cons of fading, that you are still a Jehovah's Witness. Even though you may say you're not, you technically are a Jehovah's Witness. But uh did you have any or did you have anything else to add to that before we move on? The Any more cons? Okay. So maybe Samantha, if you want to bring us into our third category, is what are the advantages of letting the elders disfellowship you? I mean, there are a couple advantages, but or not even that you're going out of your way to get this fellowship, but what are the advantages of basically just facing the music, of like letting them do whatever they're going to do, and they end up finding out you have these beliefs, these new beliefs, you no longer believe to the truth, and then they now end up disfellowshipping you. What are the pros of doing that as opposed to, say, fading or staying PIMO?
So we're talking of a situation where you end up having a judicial because you disagree with the teachings or you are questioning. It's quite easy to get disfellowshipped on the basis of being so-called apostate. And I say so-called because it's only from the organization's point of view. And every individual needs to sort of decide for themselves whether they want to use that label or reject it, because quite rightly, it is only from a Jehovah's Witness point of view that disagreeing with them or changing your mind about disagreeing with them becomes apostasy. Um, I'm trying to think of pros. Do you know the biggest pro is that you get to be out and you get to be legally cut off and out. I would say that is, and you've made a stand. You've made a stand that you don't agree. It is quite a dramatic exit. Um, I don't know what the advantages are. Maybe at least to those elders, you get to show some reasons. And I still remember one of my when I was studying counseling, one of my tutors said, "You cannot unlearn things." So anyone you manage to say something to about your reasons why you're questioning and leaving, and even the elders in the judicial, they will have to listen to those reasons. And you just never know. You might sow some seeds that further down the line get them to think, what do I really believe? What am I really part of? What made that individual that maybe previously was very zealous, very clearly loving God and the Bible, loving Jehovah, what made them change? So I think that's probably an advantage, that you get to kind of clear the air in a sense. That would probably be the only advantage I can think of. You clear the air by talking about it openly with them, at least to the degree that you have to. It depends how it comes out, whether you tell them or somebody tells on you as well, or you just get caught saying or doing something. It can be very unfair. Sometimes in those situations, the elders have almost made their decision in advance. The judicial system is that they use is not, it's not lawful, it's not legal, it's not biblical, and it certainly isn't fair. But yeah, it gets you out and it gets you an opportunity to at least state your reasons.
Yeah, and I think what you said is right on point because there's not really that many advantages, but I do think it's a step above being PIMO because you are free. You don't have to live a lie. And the same thing with fading. Same thing. You're free. You don't have to live a lie. No more having to fake and worrying about the elders or anything. But just to go deeper into what you were saying, another advantage is that there's two things I thought of. One, you can pretty much tell anyone you want to tell about what your question. So say if it's like the United Nations, you can go to all your friends in the congregation and flat out tell them, hey, what's with this? This is not okay. And you already know what's going to happen. Eventually, they're going to rat you out to the elders, and it's going to make that judicial committee. But when you understand it's going to happen, you have the freedom to do that. You can go to anyone you want to go to and say, "Hey, look at this article. Did you know we're part of the United Nations? Have you heard of the Australia Royal Commission?" And then, like, when the elders even want to trap you in that judicial meeting, even when they contact you, you can basically argue with them. And not that I want to say argue because arguing has got like a bad connotation with it, but basically you can pretty much tell them how it is. Like, I want an answer. Why didn't you tell me you were in the United Nations? Why didn't you tell me this? Why are you covering up child abuse? And whatever elder you're dealing with, like, what are they going to do? Like, the only thing they can do is set up the judicial meeting, but you have an opportunity to possibly wake them up and make them start thinking, or just basically release that anger you feel inside and say it to them because you don't have to be afraid because you already know how it's going to turn out. Um, and then like I've seen some videos where people actually they recorded their judicial committee and stuff like that. So some people, if you want to capture it and really kind of try to turn things around, like that's an advantage too. If you want to go that way, go to your judicial committee with those tough questions, record it if you want to do that, make a video if you want to do it. So those are the good things. I chose to write a disassociation letter, but and it was the right choice for me. But I sometimes think it really would have been nice to take that approach of basically just showing up at that committee and telling them, hey, and showing them a bunch of evidence, like arguing with them. Because once you know that you're out the door, like there's nothing to be afraid of. It doesn't matter if there's three of you and one of them, you got facts. All they got is protocols they have to follow. So you can show them Australia Royal Commission, United Nations, 607 BCE. Like you can throw it all out, and they can't do nothing. All they can do is say, "Okay, it's time for you to go. We're going to disfellowship you." And you could stay. I'm not going, and then wait for them to call the police if you want to take it that far. Uh, so some who get satisfaction out of that, it will release probably some tension to be able to tell them how it is and not even care about their procedures and all that stuff. And I also want to say too, I'm pretty sure, I don't know this for a fact, but I bet those elders and those judicial committees, like, it's probably very uncomfortable for them because the stuff you're saying, they're going to hear it and they may try to pretend they don't hear it or they may try to ignore it. But you mentioned certain things, it's going to question their faith and it puts them in an awkward situation. So while they may seem like they're all big and tough because there's three of them and one of you, it's probably very uncomfortable when you raise those tough questions. And especially if you get angry about it. Like, you didn't tell me that I was building Kingdom Halls and you turn around and sell it to a church. Like, I want my money back. Like, what are they going to do if you get like angry like that? Nothing, because their power is gone. So those are just some advantages if those want to go that route. It could be therapeutic, if anything. But I guess on to our or actually no. Oh, those were the pros. I forgot. So the what are the cons now? Um, the cons of basically facing the judicial committee. Um, I don't know. I kind of rambled on a little bit. Do you want to start off with that? Like, what are the cons of basically putting yourself through that?
Yeah, I think one thing I want to say is we are talking about having a judicial and kind of knowing that you're going to be disfellowshipped for disagreeing with the teachings of the organization and the policies and practices. We will cover separately coping with being disfellowshipped for other reasons and the emotional impact and struggles that come from that. And you may be afterwards then starting to look at material like these podcasts and realizing that maybe you don't want to return. So that's a separate matter. What would be the negative of going through a judicial on apostasy, well, alleged apostasy, for example? I personally had the elders really, even though I had already given them the disassociation letter, they really pushed hard to try to get me to meet with three elders on Saturday night at the Kingdom Hall. And of course, I knew it was a judicial. They didn't even have the decency to call it that. And I rejected it politely and then firmly. Um, I personally didn't see the point. I'd already said to the coordinator and secretary my reasons for leaving and my reasons for absolutely not wanting to remain in a place that I did no longer think had anything to do with God's direction and Holy Spirit whatsoever. And I consider a dangerous group, actually. The cons are that you're going to have to sit there and go through it all with elders, and you don't know what they're going to throw at you. I would say another concern I personally would have is I'm a great believer that words do have an impact on us. They have an impact on us emotionally and psychologically. So you then being disfellowshipped, I believe that they read a scripture and refer to a scripture that they're handing you over to Satan. Now that is actually a curse. They are placing a verbal curse on you. So even if you don't necessarily subscribe to the notion that words have enough power to become blessings and curses, you will certainly understand that there's a negative effect of somebody that you have previously perhaps respected, previously maybe been friends with, now saying that to you and saying that over you in your life. It is a very negative statement, and you're leaving under a negative situation where really they do have, in that situation, the elders have the control because they're following the policies and guidelines that they have now got the authority over you to basically throw you out, disfellowship you from the congregation, and cut off your friends and family. So I would say that's the negative of the potential psychological, emotional trauma of having to sit through possibly several hours of deliberations going back and forth. It might be that you don't agree with them. It might be that you didn't actually want things to get to that point, that you didn't intend for them to get to that point. So it could be quite traumatic. I'd say that's the negatives. That's the negatives of going ahead and going through with a judicial, because you can refuse to turn up, you can refuse it, and you can also take somebody with you if you do decide to go.
Is that a new rule that you can take somebody with you? Because I heard that they don't allow you to bring people with you, or at least in the room, or did they change that?
I actually don't know, but
Maybe legally you're allowed to, but they make you
yeah.
seem like you can't. They've got to be alone.
I know. Well, you know what, guys, you can download the Elders book online. JW Leaks has it. There's updates all the time. It's a little known fact that generally speaking, in judicials, you can have somebody with you. They just don't tell you.
Mhm.
Think of it psychologically, they're going to have so much more power over you if it's you on your own against three people. And it's especially unfair when it's a young person or a female, in my opinion. So it's the whole power games and dynamics are completely out. There's no biblical precedent for that, um, which kind of just questions the whole setup. Um, what I would say is check on that because I don't know if there's differences in what the judicial is about, whether they allow you to bring somebody in. I know that in certain cases, they will, for example, say the husband should be there if the wife is having a judicial for adultery. But interestingly, if he does, she doesn't even have to be told necessarily. So it gets murky, it gets complicated. Best thing to do is to download the Elders Shepherd the Flock of God, freely available online,
Mhm.
and just have a read and try to get the latest updated version.
Yeah, and one thing I think too to add to what you said about the cons is that they control your relationship. So basically, if you go through that process, as soon as they disfellowship you and they make that announcement, now they control your connections. Now basically your friends and family are cut off. Once they hear your name, they cannot ever speak to you again. So that is just one thing to consider as far as making that transition from just fading to going through that committee is that if you fade, you do have that control. If you want to still talk to your parents or certain people, you can just monitor how much you want to let them know where your head is at. But it's kind of your control. And then like if you have a parent that will kind of know that you're on some so-called apostate thinking, some parents are spiritually weak according to JW standards where they will still talk to you. Um, but when an announcement is made, it's harder for family to still want to talk to you because then it's like even if they want to talk to you, they can't because that announcement was made. So um that is just the disadvantages of going through that process is just knowing that they have control. Once they make that announcement, pretty much everyone's going to stop talking to you. Um, and I think that's really the only. Oh, another con too. I don't mean to put you on a spot, Samantha, with this, but something on your video, not maybe not spend too much time on it, but maybe just want to touch on the whole like why we may want to not let them disfellowship us, or actually you already did with the curse. Um, uh, I was thinking it goes further than that. Um, was there something more in your video about that where you got into it further, like as far as like we're under, I think the curse covers it enough. I'll just have to watch your video again. I think you got into more of like the spiritual aspect of like them putting that curse on you. Um,
Mm.
but yeah, so that's basically the pros and cons of going through that process of letting them disfellowship you. Now, the fourth option, which is the most proactive, where you take complete power back, and again, it may not be for everybody, but this is what me and Samantha both decided to do, which was to write a letter. Like, so we are the ones saying we no longer want to be a Jehovah's Witness. Take us off the list. We're not a Jehovah's Witness anymore. Um, so Samantha, what are the pros of doing a disassociation letter as opposed to some of the other options?
I think if you are ready to make that decision, it then becomes your decision. And you're saying, actually, I'm rejecting you. I'm stepping away and I'm leaving this place and I'm cutting all contact with it. So I made sure that in my disassociation letter, I kept it really polite. We could even stick it at the end of this video. I was polite, but I just said I do no longer want to be known or a member. So I tried to name the legal entities I was aware of. So, Jehovah's Witnesses Congregation of Enfield, Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. I wanted to just cut myself off legally, spiritually, physically, emotionally, mentally from all of that. Now, in that moment, and once it was announced, I did manage to cut myself away legally and spiritually to a great degree. The spiritual, getting rid of that still takes a while. Emotionally, mentally, the work goes on. Especially with someone like me who was born into the organization, it takes time. I'm getting there, but it is taking time. But I think the main thing is, if you disassociate yourself, it's your decision, it's not theirs. So you are starting your life outside the organization on that knowledge that actually I took some power back. I made the decision for myself, and I told them that I don't want to be part of this any longer. I am now leaving, and I am now free from you. I'm now free and alive.
Yeah, and just to add to that, because that basically is the basis of the taking your power back. That's the main reason why writing the letter is very good. And I won't get into a lot of stuff about like low vibrations and raising your vibration and things like that. But people who understand those terms of love, like being in a low vibration, is that fear is a low vibration. So when you stay in fear, it's a low vibration. And for those that don't really understand that terminology, that basically anytime you're in fear is not necessarily something that's good because that fear is always there. And the other three options, or mainly the first two, is always going to keep you in fear. If you're a PIMO, there's that fear of being caught, being found out. If you're faded, you still have to pretend that you're a witness to friends and family. If you go through the judicial committee, there may be some fear leading up to that, maybe. But when you write the letter, you're basically fully taking your power back because you already know when you send that letter that your friends and family will cut you off. And of course, you could talk to them before you send the letter. So that's the other thing too, is it's easier to go up to people and talk to them because you already know that once they hear your name is once your name is announced, you already know that they're gonna cut you off. So knowing that, you don't have to be afraid anymore. You can go up to your parents, your friends and family, and let them know, hey, I'm leaving because of this, and but you're not afraid of anything, and you took in your power back 100%. So that is the biggest advantage I think of writing the disassociation letters. You take your power back, and you don't have to be afraid of anything, and it's all on your terms. Um, Now I don't know if there's I mean I can't really think of any cons to writing a letter because uh it's really about taking your power back. So if I was going to try to think of any cons about a disassociation letter, it's really not any different from going through the judicial committee because in both of those cases, once your name is read, you're going to get shunned. Um, the only difference is you've taken your power back. So I can't really think of any other cons that are specific to that decision. And just my personal opinion, I feel that that is the best way to go about it. And that's why I chose that one because I think that when you balance the pros and cons, that one is just mostly positive when you write the letter and walk away. You know you're going to get shunned, but you don't have to live a lie. You don't have to pretend you're a witness. You don't have to be PIMO and still go to conventions and all that. And they'll just have no more power over you. But I don't know, Samantha, I don't know if you can think of any like cons, like anything bad about the disassociation letter.
Well, I think the issue with it is that, for example, in my case, I didn't sort of think to first tell everybody the reasons I was leaving and then tell the elders, which I think would have been quite a clever way of doing it because you'd have that opportunity to just make it very clear to people and an opportunity to have that one last conversation. Because I disassociated and they would have not announced the reasons, it might have led to lots of speculation as to why I was leaving. I think me subsequently becoming quite active on YouTube and stuff would have made it clear that I left because I disagreed with things, and I no longer wanted to be known as a witness for that reason. I no longer wanted to be associated with this place. The biggest negative is that you are treated exactly the same way as a disfellowshipped person. So you will lose that contact with friends and family that follow the shunning policies, which most of them will do. It's actually really interesting to see how people actually do go along with it, even though officially in court cases now the organization has made the claim several times that normal family relations continue and it's only spiritual things that aren't talked about, which we know is a lie from the pits of hell, because anyone who knows anything about witnesses knows that they absolutely shun. The positive about them shunning is that it's a continual reminder of how dark, twisted, and lack of natural affection permeates that particular group of people in that community. So in that sense, it's useful. In a sort of negative way, it's useful as a reminder that we have actually managed to get away from that. But yeah, that's the biggest negative, is that you kind of have a similar outcome to disfellowshipping.
Yeah, so I think that we covered that pretty thoroughly, and I hope that this is helpful for those who are in the organization to really consider these things. So if you're a PIMO, there's definitely some reasons why that may be smart to stay in that situation, but just think of long term, you're never going to really get mentally healthy as long as you're still in that situation. So it's really good to improve our life and move on. And you can't do that as long as you're still a Jehovah's Witness, especially knowing that it is a cult. Um, and then when it comes to fading, that's definitely a lot better, I think, in my opinion, because you're not at the meetings, you're not being brainwashed, or you're not dealing with the JW stuff. But then, just as a reminder, you are still technically a Jehovah's Witness. I think that's important to understand that you are a Jehovah's Witness still. If anything ever happens to you, you may still be dealt with as a Jehovah's Witness, whether it's in a hospital or, God forbid, you end up passing away. You're still a Jehovah's Witness. So that's just something to keep in mind. Uh, and then the disfellowshipping, we already know that you're going to get shunned. You can't get around it. But if you want to give the elders a piece of your mind and be able to tell them off, then go for it. Um, but then the disassociation is the most choice, that's the most freedom. I can't say it's the best choice because that's just my opinion, but that is the most freedom. You're not fearful. You don't have to hide anymore. You don't got to worry about, oh, someone's seen this, or, you're taking your freedom back and you have full control. And so we hope that this was helpful for, I mean, this is mainly targeted for those who are PIMO, those who are faded, and people that are in the process of waking up as they're starting to learn this is not the so-called truth. So we really hope that this can help. Um, and is there anything else you wanted to add, Samantha, as far as our discussion tonight?
Not really. I think we've covered it quite thoroughly. Definitely spend time thinking about the how, when, why. But my experience, though, is that there is not really ever a perfect time. You just have to do it at some point. And sometimes it's a bit like ripping off a plaster. The longer you wait, the scarier it gets and the more painful it gets as well. So there isn't really a good way to leave. The organization is specifically designed that way to keep people in. So once you're in, you're locked in. They tell you to cut off friends and family that aren't witnesses. They tell you to only associate with other people in the congregation. They tell you to only marry other witnesses. So it's all designed to keep you very much locked in. And when you're disfellowshipped or you disassociate and they stop talking to you and they basically bring about a psychological death, again, that is a control mechanism. And there's been some really interesting news from Norway just today, just an update. Now, what's happened in Norway is in already, I believe it was 2 years ago, in Norway, witnesses lost their registration as a religious community, and they lost all the tax breaks and benefits that came with that. And the reason they lost it is breach of human rights, which is what shunning former members was viewed as. Now, the witnesses they actually took the state to court, and it went to Oslo District Court in January. And today it was announced that they've actually lost that appeal. So they are going to continue to be deregistered. They're going to continue to lose the tax breaks. They were also ordered to pay the court costs, which are to the tune of 1.1 million Norwegian kroner. They were hoping to get back 35 million kroner that they would have lost over the last couple of years, that they've been denied those subsidies. What I find particularly ironic is that growing up as a witness, I used to hear all these stories of court cases where brothers had gone to European Court of Human Rights, and they'd gone to the high courts and really fought for the right for religious freedom to preach and to be a Jehovah's Witness. Isn't it ironic that on the one hand, they were fighting for their right to practice a religion, and on the other hand, the way they practice their religion breaches human rights of members and former members? And I'll just read the statement which says it. So the reason for the revocation of the state subsidy is that the Ministry of Children and Families and the state administrator believe that the exclusion practice, so the exclusion practice, which is disfellowshipping and subsequent shunning, the exclusion practice of Jehovah's Witnesses involves negative social control and prevents free expression from the religious community. So it's negative social control and preventing free expression. So that's the polite way of saying the organization are controlling bullies, and they cut off your free will and your freedom to choose what you believe and think, and certainly your freedom to change your mind. So I think that's a fantastic outcome, and I'm hoping that other countries follow suit. How can you claim to be benefiting people if you're actually damaging them and causing families and individuals lots and lots of hurt? And why would you then be getting charitable tax breaks? So yeah, so I thought that was quite good, and it relates to our discussion about different ways to leave.
Yeah, and with that being said, that from what I can see, I think this organization is falling apart. That they're being found out. There's all these court cases, all this stuff is coming out, and you can see the organization, like the truth is coming out. And they say that, like, I might have this saying wrong, but like an empire only lasts so long, like maybe like 100 years, certain empires, and not that they're an empire, but basically even like big empires, they have a time limit where it expires, especially ones doing dirt. And Watchtower's been operating since the 1800s, late 1800s, but still the 1800s. So they've gone through a whole century of brainwashing and destroying people. And you know what? Their time is just about up. It's time for this empire to fall, and it's falling. And as you can see, the rate that it's falling is not about to recover. It's only getting worse. It's only getting worse. And they're desperate to make all these changes, no more bear, no more service time. They're doing what they can to try to still bring members in, but it's inevitable. It's inevitable. But me, Samantha, and Andrea, the three of us, we're here for all of you who are coming out of this organization as this organization is falling apart. So thank you again for being with us. And I think we will attach those disassociation letters. I have mine too. So we're gonna now, when closing out, put our disassociation letters up, and you're free to share these with whoever. So and we hope that it's helpful, and we'll see you guys next week.